Okay, so now that we have some of that under our belt, let's get to the Scarlet Pimpernel. So I started on chapter 8. This is Marguerite. She recently just said goodbye to her brother. He set sail to go to France, and he's a Republican, meaning that he is, or they both are, they're on the side of the people who are starting this revolution, but both of them are a little uncomfortable with what they refer to as the excesses of violence when it is a natural product of the very violent, decades-long, centuries-long oppression that people were experiencing. And then she ran into Chauvelin. He is someone that she knew in France, and she's very excited to see him, but he seems to have some ulterior motives. So, just to be clear, this is aristocratic propaganda written by Baroness Orczy, who was also a fascist sympathizer at the beginning of the Third Reich, and that she largely came up with the idea for this book because the people who were working on her father's land originally were trying to negotiate better working circumstances, and he refused to do this, that he instead wanted to industrialize and displace them from their jobs, and so then they defaced his property. And so now the Baroness is like, oh, that's so evil, these people. It's like, yeah, that was property. Who cares? You have like multiple estates. So we're looking at this through a Marxist lens, just to make that clear. Where did I leave off? Okay. Have you heard of the Scarlet Pimpernel, citoyenne Saint-Just? Asked Chauvelin abruptly. Heard of the Scarlet Pimpernel? She retorted, with a long and merry laugh. Faith, man, we talk of nothing else. We have hats à la Scarlet Pimpernel. Our horses are called Scarlet Pimpernel. At the Prince of Wales' supper party the other night, we had a soufflé à la Scarlet Pimpernel. Lud, she added gaily. The other day I ordered at my milliner's a blue dress trimmed with green, and bless me if she did not call that à la Scarlet Pimpernel. So this also is talking about how it's trying to portray the English as all being extremely royalist during the French Revolution, but clearly there is a separation of class and where their sympathies lie, whether they are for revolutionaries or against. So naturally, the aristocracy, they were royalists and were like, oh, the horror of what's happening. And the common people are like, yeah, that makes sense. But it's trying to paint with a broad brush this idea that all of England was against the revolution, which was not the case. And the few people it does show of being against the revolution, it shows them as being like pretentious and like self-righteous, which is also this kind of cynical framing of people who were actually trying to support human rights. Chauvelin had not moved while she prattled merrily along. He did not even attempt to stop her when her musical voice and her childlike laugh went echoing through the still evening air. But he remained serious and earnest whilst she laughed, and his voice, clear, incisive, and hard, was not raised above his breath as he said, Then, as you have heard of the enigmatical personage, citoyenne, you must also have guessed and known that the man who hides his identity under this strange pseudonym is the most bitter enemy of our republic, of France, of men like Armand Saint-Just. La, she said with a quaint little sigh, I dare swear he is. France has many bitter enemies these days. But you, citoyenne, are a daughter of France, and should be ready to help her in a moment of deadly peril. My brother Armand devotes his life to France, she retorted proudly. As for me, I can do nothing, here in England. Yes, you, he urged still more earnestly, whilst his thin, fox-like face seemed suddenly to have grown impressive and full of dignity. See, again, like he's this conniving person. It's like, yeah, the working class has to be smart about how they are resisting. Here in England, citoyen, you alone can help us. Listen, I have been sent over here by the Republican government as its representative. I present my credentials to Mr. Pitt in London tomorrow. One of my duties here is to find out all about this League of the Scarlet Pimpernel, which has become a standing menace to France, since it is pledged to help our cursed aristocrats, traitors to their country, and enemies of the people. Well, yes. To escape from the just punishment which they deserve. You know as well as I do, citoyen, that once they are over here, those French émigrés try to rouse public feeling against the Republic. They are ready to join issue with any enemy bold enough to attack France. Now, within the last month, scores of these émigrés, some only suspected of treason, others actually condemned by the Tribunal of Public Safety, have succeeded in crossing the Channel. Their escape in each instance was planned, organized, and effected by this society of young English jackanapes, headed by a man whose brain seems as resourceful as his identity is mysterious. All the most strenuous efforts on the part of my spies have failed to discover who he is, whilst the others are the hands, he is the head, who beneath this strange anonymity calmly works at the destruction of France. I mean to strike at that head, and for this I want your help. Through him, afterwards, I can reach the rest of the gang. He is a young buck in English society, of that I feel sure. Find that man for me, citoyen, he urged. Find him for France. Seems like a good cause, but in this story, he's viewed as a villain. Marguerite listened to Chauvelin's impassioned speech without uttering a word, scarce making a movement, hardly daring to breathe. She had told him before that this mysterious hero of romance was the talk of the smart set to which she belonged. Smart set, which means like the noble classes. Already, before this, her heart and her imagination had been stirred by the thought of the brave man who, unknown to fame, had rescued hundreds of lives from a terrible, often unmerciful fate. Is it? I don't know. She had but little real sympathy with those haughty French aristocrats, insolent in their pride of caste, actually describing it as caste once again, which is an accurate depiction, of whom the Comtesse de Tournay de Basserive was so typical an example. But Republican and liberal-minded though she was from principle, she hated and loathed the methods which the young Republic had chosen for establishing itself. She had not been in Paris for some months. The horrors and bloodshed of the Reign of Terror, culminating in the September massacres, had only come across the Channel to her as a faint echo. We have a footnote here. If I can turn the page with my bloody gloves. Okay. These massacres occurred in early September 1792, just weeks after the overthrow of the monarchy, when mass hysteria and suspicion was at its height. Fears of a Prussian invasion in support of the royalists unleashed a flood of fear and hatred that manifested itself as unbridled violence against prisoners and other convenient enemies. So you can also tell as well that, like, the person who is editing this, the scholar who is helping to provide the introduction and these footnotes, is more sympathetic to the ruling class. The Committee of General Surveillance incited hatred as revolutionary journalists such as Jean-Paul Marat and Louis-Marie Fréron cried for revenge. This atmosphere of generalized fear finally degenerated into mob violence on Rue de Bussy on September 3rd, as prisoners who were being transferred to the prison de l'Abbaye were murdered in the street. The crowd then made its way to prisons throughout the city, where it continued its slaughter without intervention from the authorities. Yeah, because that's what happens when mobs have had enough. The massacre continued for 4 days. Dragged out of their cells, prisoners would appear before an improvised public tribunal, in which they were perfunctorily condemned and delivered to the justice of the mob. Which is maybe one of the truest ways to get justice is by having a mob exact it. The number of victims in Paris had been estimated to be between 1,300 and 1,400, and there were similar instances of massacres in Orléans, Versailles, Meaux, and Rheims. Okay. Robespierre, Danton, Marat. She had not known in their new guise of bloody judiciaries, merciless wielders of the guillotine. Hey, we have another footnote. Marat, born into a modest family in Switzerland in 1743, Jean-Paul Marat was trained as a doctor and a veterinarian. He became a journalist and a prominent and influential voice of the French Revolution. He advocated dictatorship in order to ensure the revolution's success. Yeah, that's not great. We don't like that. Marat's extremist writings contribute to fueling public fervor before the September massacres, and along with Georges Danton and Maximilien de Robespierre, he embodied the dictatorship of the extremist group known as the Montagnards. He was assassinated by a member of the conservative Girardin faction, Charlotte Corday, and honored with a national burial. His gravestone reads, "Here lies Marat, the friend of the people, assassinated by the enemies of the people on July 13th, 1793. So he's like, we're gonna replace a king with another king, essentially. Her very soul recoiled in horror from these excesses, to which she feared her brother Armand, moderate Republican as he was, might become one day the Holocaust. Okay. Because there are enough nobles to actually have that be a possibility. It's just like a complete misinterpretation of what the word Holocaust even means. Then, when she heard of this young band of English enthusiasts who, for sheer love of their fellow men, dragged women and children, old and young men, from a horrible death, her heart had glowed with pride for them. And now as Chauvelin spoke, her very soul went out to the gallant and mysterious leader of the reckless little band, who risked his life daily, who gave it freely and without ostentation for the sake of humanity. For the sake of whose humanity, right? So, talking about how he's doing it for sheer love of their fellow men. No, these aristocrats have a vested interest in saving the lives of fellow aristocrats, that they are protecting their own, protecting themselves, and that they have an interest in squashing this revolution and rebellion because they don't want the same thing to happen to them. So it is deeply self-interested. Her eyes were moist when Chauvelin had finished speaking. The lace at her bosom rose and fell with quick, excited breathing. Wow. She no longer heard the noise of drinking from the inn. She did not heed her husband's voice or his inane laugh. Her thoughts had gone wandering in search of the mysterious hero. Ah, there was a man she might have loved. Had he come her way? Everything in him appealed to her romantic imagination. His personality, his strength, his bravery, the loyalty of those who served under him in the same noble cause, and above all, that anonymity which crowned him as if with a halo of romantic glory. "Find him for France, citoyenne." Chauvelin's voice rose to her ear. Close to her ear, roused her from her dreams. The mysterious hero had vanished, and not 20 yards away with her, a man was drinking and laughing, to whom she had sworn faith and loyalty. "La, man," she said with a return of her assumed flippancy, "you are astonishing. Where in the world am I to look for him?" "You go everywhere, citoyenne," whispered Chauvelin, insinuatingly. "Lady Blakeney is the pivot of social London, so I am told. You see everything, you hear everything." "Easy, my friend," retorted Marguerite, drawing herself up to her full height and looking down with a slight thought of contempt on the small, thin figure before her, as he's trying to, fight for the liberation of his people. "Easy. You seem to forget that there are 6 feet of Sir Percy Blakeney and a long line of ancestors to stand between Lady Blakeney and such a thing as you propose." "For the sake of France, citoyenne," reiterated Chauvelin earnestly. Tush, man! You talk nonsense anyway. For even if you did not know who this Scarlet Pimpernel is, you could do nothing to him. An Englishman? I'd take my chance of that, said Chauvelin, with a dry, rasping little laugh. Yeah, as you should. At any rate, we could send him to the guillotine first to cool his ardor. Then, when there is a diplomatic fuss about it, we can apologize, humbly, to the British government, and if necessary, pay compensation to the bereaved family. Yeah, that sounds like a plan. What you propose is horrible, Chauvelin, she said, drawing away from his as from some noisome insect. From his, I'm guessing that's a typo, drawing away from him as from some noisome insect. Whoever the man may be, he is brave and noble, and never, do you hear me, never would I lend a hand to such villainy. You prefer to be insulted by every French aristocrat who comes to this country? Chauvelin had taken sure aim when he shot this tiny shaft. Marguerite's fresh young cheeks became a thought more pale, and she bit her underlip, for which she would not let him see that the shaft had struck home. That is beside the question, she said at last with indifference. I can defend myself, but I refuse to do any dirty work for you, or for France. You have other means at your disposal. You must use them, my friend. And without another look at Chauvelin, Marguerite Blakeney turned her back on him and walked straight into the inn. That is not your last word, citoyenne, said Chauvelin, as a flood of light from the passage illumined her elegant, richly clad figure. We meet in London, I hope. We meet in London, she said, speaking over her shoulder at him, but that is my last word. She threw open the coffee-room door and disappeared from his view, but he remained under the porch for a moment or two, taking a pinch of snuff. He had received a rebuke and a snub, but his shrewd, fox-like face looked neither abashed nor disappointed. On the contrary, a curious smile, half sarcastic and wholly satisfied, played around the corners of his thin lips. So we see her reject trying to find out who the Scarlet Pimpernel is, and how she now has become even more loyal to the royalists. Okay, I think we have time for one more chapter. This is Chapter 9, The Outrage. A beautiful starlit night had followed on the day of incessant rain, a cool, balmy, late summer's night, essentially English in its suggestion of moisture and scent of wet earth and dripping leaves. The magnificent coach, drawn by 4 of the finest thoroughbreds in England, had driven off along the London road, with Sir Percy Blakeney on the box, holding the reins in his slender, feminine hands. Same. And beside him, Lady Blakeney wrapped in costly furs. A 50-mile drive on a starlit summer night. Marguerite had hailed the notion of it with delight. Sir Percy was an enthusiastic whip. His 4 thoroughbreds, which had been sent down to Dover a couple of days before, were just sufficiently fresh and restive to add zest to the expedition. Marguerite reveled in anticipation of the few hours of solitude. With the soft night breeze fanning her cheeks, she thought wandering whither away. With her thoughts wandering whither away. She knew from old experience that Sir Percy would speak little, if at all. He had often driven her on his beautiful coach for hours at night, from point to point, without making more than 1 or 2 casual remarks upon the weather or the state of the roads. He was very fond of driving by night, and she had very quickly adopted his fancy. As she sat next to him hour after hour, admiring the dexterous, certain way in which he handled the reins, she's like, "Oh, how you use your hands." Okay. She often wondered what went on in that slow-going head of his. He never told her, and she had never cared to ask. At the Fisherman's Rest, Mr. Jellyband was going the round, putting out the lights. His bar customers had all gone, But upstairs in the snug little bedrooms, Mr. Jellyband had quite a few important guests, the Comtesse de Tournay with Suzanne and the Vicomte, and there were 2 more bedrooms ready for Sir Andrew Ffoulke and Lord Anthony Dewhurst, if the 2 young men should elect to honor the ancient hostelry hostelry and stay the night. Wow. Tripping over some things. For the moment, these 2 young gallants were comfortably installed in the coffee room before the huge log fire, which, in spite of the mildness of the evening, had been allowed to burn merrily. "I say, Jelly, has everyone gone?" asked Lord Tony, as the worthy landlord still busied himself, clearing away glasses and mugs.
"Everyone as you see, my lord."
"And all your servants gone to bed?"
"All except the boy on duty in the bar, and,"
added Mr. Jellyband with a laugh,
"I expect he'll be asleep before long, the rascal."
"Then can we talk here undisturbed for half an hour?"
"At your service, my lord. I'll leave your candles on the dresser, and your rooms are quite ready. I sleep at the top of the house myself, but if your lordship will only call out loudly enough, I dare say I shall hear."
"All right, Jelly. And, I say, put the lamp out. The fire'll give us all the light we need, and we don't want to attract the passer-by."
"All right, my lord."
Mr. Jellyband did as he was bid. He turned out the quaint old lamp that hung from the raftered ceiling and blew out all the candles. "Let us have a bottle of wine, Jelly," suggested Sir Andrew.
"All right, sir."
Jellyband went off to fetch the wine. The room now was quite dark, save for the circle of ruddy and fitful light formed by the brightly blazing logs in the hearth.
"Is that all, gentlemen?"
asked Jellyband, as he returned with a bottle of wine and a couple of glasses, which he placed on the table. "That'll do nicely, thanks, Jelly," said Lord Tony.
"Good night, my lord. Good night, sir."
"Good night, Jelly." The 2 young men listened, whilst the heavy tread of Mr. Jellyband was heard echoing along the passage and staircase. Presently, even that sound died out, and the whole of the Fisherman's Rest seemed wrapped in sleep, save the 2 young men drinking in silence beside the hearth. For a while, no sound was heard, even in the coffee room, save the ticking of the old grandfather's clock and the crackling of the burning wood. "All right again this time, folks," or folk, added Lord Antony at last. Sir Andrew had been dreaming evidently, gazing into the fire and seeing therein, no doubt, a pretty, piquant face with large brown eyes and a wealth of dark curls round a childish forehead. "Yes," he said, still musing. "All right."
"No hitch?"
"None." Lord Antony laughed pleasantly as he poured himself out another glass of wine. "I need not ask, I suppose, whether you found the journey pleasant this time?" "No, friend, you need not ask," replied Sir Andrew gaily. "It was all right." I have a tickle in my throat. Okay. "Then here's to her very good health," said jovial Lord Tony. "She's a bonny lass, though she is a French one. And here's to your courtship. May it flourish and prosper exceedingly." He drained his glass to the last drop, then joined his friend beside the hearth. "Well, you'll be doing the journey next, Tony, I expect," said Sir Andrew, rousing himself from his meditations. "You and Hastings, certainly, and I hope you may have as pleasant a task as I had, and as charming a travelling companion. You have no idea, Tony." "No, I haven't," interrupted his friend pleasantly, "but I'll take your word for it. And now," he added, whilst a sudden earnestness crept over his jovial young face, "how about business?" The 2 young men drew their chairs closer together, and instinctively, though they were alone, their voices sank to a whisper. "I saw the Scarlet Pimpernel alone for a few moments in Calais," said Sir Andrew, "a day or 2 ago. He crossed over to England 2 days before we did. He had escorted the party all the way from Paris, dressed, you'll never credit it, as an old market woman, and driving, until they were safely out of the city, the covered cart under which the Comtesse de Tournay, Mademoiselle Suzanne, and the Vicomte lay concealed among the turnips and cabbages. They themselves, of course, never suspected who their driver was. He drove them right through a line of soldiery and a yelling mob, who were screaming, "À bas les aristos!" Down with the aristos. But the market cart got through along with some others, and the Scarlet Pimpernel in shawl, petticoat, and hood yelled, "À bas les aristos!" louder than anybody. "Faith!" added the young man, as his eyes glowed with enthusiasm for the beloved leader. "That man's a marvel. His cheek is preposterous, I vow, and that's what carries him through." Lord Antony, whose vocabulary was more limited than that of his friend, could only find an oath or two with which to show his admiration for his leader. "He wants you and Hastings to meet him at Calais," said Sir Andrew more quietly, "and on the 2nd of the next month, let me see, that will be next Wednesday." "Yes?" "It is, of course, the case of the Comte de Tournay, this time a dangerous task for the Comte, whose escape from his chateau, after he had been declared a suspect by the Committee of Public Safety, was a masterpiece of the Scarlet Pimpernel's ingenuity, is now under sentence of death. It will be rare sport to get him out of France, and you will have a narrow escape if you get through at all. Saint Just has actually gone to meet him. Of course, no one suspects Saint Just as yet, but after that, to get them both out of the country? I'faith, 'twill be a tough job, and tax even the ingenuity of our chief. I hope I may yet have orders to be of the party." So it's implying that Armand, Marguerite's brother, he's actually working for the Scarlet Pimpernel, the royalists. And he's going undercover.
"Have you any special instructions for me?"
"Yes, rather more precise ones than usual. It appears that the Republican government have sent an accredited agent over to England, a man named Chauvelin, who is said to be terribly bitter against our league and determined to discover the identity of our leader, so that he may have him kidnapped the next time he attempts to set foot in France. This Chauvelin has brought a whole army of spies with him, and until the chief has sampled the lot, he thinks we should meet as seldom as possible on the business of the League, and on no account should we talk to each other in public places for a time. When he wants to speak to us, he will contrive to let us know." The two young men were both bending over the fire, for the blaze had died down, and only a red glow from the dying embers cast a lurid light on a narrow semicircle in front of the hearth. The rest of the room lay buried in complete gloom. Sir Andrew had taken a pocketbook from his pocket and drawn therefrom a paper, which he unfolded, and together they tried to read it by the dim red firelight. So intent were they upon this, so wrapped up in the cause, the business they had so much at heart, so precious was this document which came from the very hand of their adored leader, that they had eyes and ears only for that. They lost count of the sounds around them, of the dropping of the crisp ash from the grate, of the monotonous ticking of the clock, of the soft, almost imperceptible rustle of something on the floor close beside them. A figure had emerged from under one of the benches. With snake-like, noiseless movements, it crept closer and closer to the young men. Not breathing, only gliding along the floor in the inky blackness of the room. "You are to read these instructions and commit them to memory," said Sir Andrew, "then destroy them." He was about to replace the letter case in his pocket when a tiny slip of paper fluttered from it and fell onto the floor. Lord Antony stooped and picked it up. "What's that?" he asked. "I don't know," replied Sir Andrew. "It dropped out of your pocket just now. It certainly did not seem to be with the other paper." "Strange. I wonder when it got there. It is from the chief," he added, glancing at the paper. Both stooped to try and decipher this last tiny scrap of paper, on which a few words had been hastily scrawled, when suddenly a slight noise attracted their attention, which seemed to come from the passage beyond. "What's that?" they said both instinctively. Lord Antony crossed the room towards the door, which he threw open quickly, and suddenly, at that very moment, he received a stunning blow between the eyes, which threw him back violently into the room. Simultaneously, the crouching, snake-like figure in the gloom had jumped up and hurled itself behind upon the unsuspecting Sir Andrew, felling him to the ground. All this occurred within the short space of 2 or 3 seconds, and before either Lord Antony or Sir Andrew had time or chance to utter a cry or to make the faintest struggle, They were each seized by 2 men. A muffler was quickly tied around the mouth of each, and they were pinioned to one another back to back, their arms, hands, and legs securely fastened. One man had, in the meanwhile, quietly shut the door. He wore a mask and now stood motionless, while the others completed their work.
"All safe, citoyen,"
said one of the men, as he took a final survey of the bonds which secured the 2 men.
"Good,"
replied the man at the door.
"Now search their pockets, and give me all the papers you find."
This was promptly and quietly done. The masked man, having taken possession of all the papers, listened for a moment or two if there were any sound within the Fisherman's Rest. Evidently satisfied that this dastardly outrage had remained unheard, he once more opened the door and pointed peremptorily down the passage. The 4 men lifted Sir Andrew and Lord Antony from the ground, and as quietly, as noiselessly as they had come, they bore the 2 pinioned young gallants out of the inn and along the Dover road into the gloom beyond. In the coffee room, the masked leader of this daring attempt was quickly glancing through the stolen papers.
"Not a bad day's work, on the whole,"
he muttered as he quietly took off his mask, and his pale, fox-like eyes glittered in the glow of the fire.
"Not a bad day's work."
So it's Chauvelin. He opened 1 or 2 more letters from Sir Andrew Folk's pocketbook, noted the tiny scrap of paper which the 2 young men had only just had time to read, but 1 letter, specially signed Armand Saint-Just, seemed to give him strange satisfaction.
"Armand Saint-Just, a traitor after all," he murmured. "Now, fair Marguerite Blakeney," he added viciously between his clenched teeth, "I think that you will help me find the Scarlet Pimpernel."
Okay. That is the end of chapter 9. These are pretty short chapters. Okay. Tomorrow, we're going to do Banned Book Club. We're reading chapters 18 and 19 of The Giver, if you are interested in joining. We will discuss the reading, the symbolism of the reading, why the book is banned. And also, I want to finish some of the videos that I didn't get to finish today. But that's going to be it for me. Thank you for being here. It was good chatting with you. I hope you have a good rest of your day, evening, wherever you are. And I will see you soon. Okay, bye.